disinformation pathways and effects in a number of countries, that is Cameroon, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, and Uganda. Well, the purpose of the study, as we shall all come to see, is that, to understand the nature, perpetrators, strategies, and pathways of disinformation, as well as the effects on democratic actors such as civil society, bloggers, government critiques, and activists as well. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Just to mention, if you're not speaking, kindly stay on mute. Let's also make use of our chat box in case you have any question or any pointer that you'd like to raise. I'd be very happy to pick that up. In fact, I see we have Bida, who says he's joining us from Juba in South Sudan, sitting in for Marina Modi, the executive director for DeFi Hate Now, South Sudan. Thank you very much, Bida, for that. And of course, anyone else who has anything to say, please feel free to drop in the chat box. We'll go straight ahead to, we have a very precise program. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Wairagala Wakabi, who is the executive director at CPESA. He has led and coordinated ICT policy research across various countries in East Africa and Southern Africa. He continues to lead policy research and driving efforts for cohesive approaches, advocating for online rights and for the use of ICT in democratic processes and civic participation. Thank you, Wairagala, for joining us. Maybe you can just start off by taking us through some of the highlights of this research and how the process you took to come to the findings and the conclusions that we are going to be discussing later today.
Thank you, Ian. Hi, everyone. I am not going to go through that because I think the next presentation is going to do exactly that. I will just give a very brief introduction, which I think in a way duplicates what you and Simon, who is going to present the results, are actually going to be talking about. But this research, why we did it is that we were responding to the growing prevalence of disinformation. We all know that that's becoming a bigger problem, like you alluded yourself, but also the shortage of evidence-based research that provides a granular understanding of disinformation pathways and effects on digital rights and democracy in this region. So, like you said, the study aimed to understand, the nature, perpetrators, pathways, and then the effects. Plus, of course, we also wanted to understand the responses of various actors, namely intermediaries and governments. Those are very many things to inquire into at the same time, and we would not do it again like that if we would do this kind of research. Would inquire into only a few elements of those, like most research does. Still, we hope that the evidence that we have generated in this study will inform multi-stakeholder advocacy for greater transparency and robust action by platforms and governments to minimize harm and to combat disinformation. Like you mentioned, Ian, this study was conducted in 5 African countries, and those are Cameroon, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, and Uganda. In each of those countries, we worked with a partner that is based in those countries. In Cameroon, it was DC Cameroon, one of the leading actors working on digital technology and human rights and society issues. In Ethiopia, it was Inform Africa / HackCheck. This is an entity that conducts fact-checking and issues reports every week on fact-checking in that country. In they do multiple languages. And then in Kenya, we worked with the KITANET, the Kenya ICT Action Network, who are a leading council, the leading ICT policy think tank in that country. And in Nigeria, we worked with Policy Lab Africa, a fairly recent entity, but one that is respected in the arena of ICT research. We are very grateful to those entities, and we are also very grateful to our peer reviewers, as well as to various experts that addressed the research meetings that advised on the study instruments and on the study approach. In choosing these countries, we wanted to have a bit of a representation from various parts of the continent, a bit of Anglophone, a bit of French speaking, but also a mix of countries with different democratic credentials and levels of penetration of digital technologies. Of course, these are just 5 countries, so we can't claim that we have this big picture of what's happening in large parts of the continent, but we think that the blending gave us a glimpse into the nature of this information across disparate countries in the region. Overall, the study serves to document and draw attention to the pathways and effects of this information across these 5 African countries. Without a doubt, a lot of work remains to be done on the issues that we have researched, not only in this region, but around the world. Nonetheless, what we have produced, we believe, contributes to the literature that tracks the effects of disinformation in Africa. And as stated earlier, we hope that this will be used to power multi-stakeholder advocacy, but also to inform further research that gives us even more interesting results. I thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Wakabi, for actually going under your time. So that means we are really doing well time-wise. Maybe before I let you go, you could talk to us a bit about the methodology. How did you, reach audiences or participants in this particular research, and what stood out for you when it came to that kind of interaction?
I would be happy to speak to that, but I had a look at the presentation of the person who is coming after me.
Yeah.
And I think her second slide speaks to those issues.
Okay.
I don't know whether you want me to go ahead and preempt what she's going to say.
No, I will not take that away from Simone. It's fine. Thank you, Wakabi. I'll come back to you if any other question comes up.
Very well.
All right, let me now introduce someone who I've actually had the pleasure to speak to before, and she's very passionate about, digital rights as well as combating misinformation in the region. I'm talking about Simone Tousi, who is CPS's Central Africa Project Officer, a strategic communication specialist and consultant with experience in international organizations, NGOs, and the private sector. Simone, good to see you once again. And your main aim is to take us through the overview of the findings of this particular report. So we'd really like to hear from you.
Okay, Jan. I don't know if I'm being heard, but good morning again, everyone. I will go straight to the point and try to present all those findings of the report, actually. But I think I will need to share my screen. Let me just try to do that and make sure it is well seen by everyone. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, all good, Simone, thank you.
Okay, perfect. But I am a little bit scared of the bandwidth and the connection. So I will, to better present and make sure I am heard, I will turn off my video. I'm really sorry for that. And make sure that we don't have interruptions because right today my connection is not being very good. Is there any issue about that?
No, no problem at all, Simon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Okay, once more, thank you everyone for joining. Yes, we went through this report, and I was acting kind of like a kind of lead researcher on Cameroon, and we worked with ADC Cameroon. I don't know if they are here. We worked with them, and okay. We worked together, and we brought out the information from Cameroon that was added and melded with information from the other countries that Dr. Wakabi always has already cited. And the report was aimed, as Jan has already said, that I will just remind very fast that it seeks to understand the nature, the perpetrators, the strategies and pathways of disinformation and its effects on democracy actors in Cameroon, Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, and Uganda. And it seeks also to review the adequacy and effectiveness of remedial measures by social media platforms, as well as government responses to disinformation, and in order to inform advocacy and action. As methodology, the prioritized subject was disinformation related to governance and human rights in electoral periods and other periods of political contestations. It focused on social media, including naturally Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp, on which disinformation commonly spreads. And it follows a qualitative method. Dr. Wakabi was asked about this previously. It followed a qualitative method supplemented by key informant interviews that reached out to various respondents representing each group of stakeholders in each country. It used also a literature review that mostly entailed the previous disinformation reports, academic research, and news. And it also included a review and analysis of disinformation that was some cases, some isolated cases of disinformation found in each country on an isolated period. And it also analyzed digital rights and free speech policies, laws, and regulations. As well, it went through, it used a content analysis of, as I said, of chosen pieces of disinformation in order to better understand the stakes around them. Okay, for country context, it is important to highlight that the countries that have been considered for the study have some underlying similarities. For example, all the 5 countries have stories of harsh pressure on digital rights, on digital space, including taxation of applications, digital transactions, and internet shutdowns, especially during elections periods and conflict periods. They also share instances of controversial elections, some cases of state governance related state governance that create protest, and those protest feeds the flow of online discourse for a certain period, sometimes the period of the protest and beyond. Some of these countries, namely Cameroon, Ethiopia, and I think Nigeria also, of cross-border and internal conflicts which brings major security and socio-economic challenges. And those challenges, those situations, they stress ethnic divisions and feed all kinds of ethnic, political, religious, socioeconomic debates that are sometimes very, very antagonistic and on the public space. We already talked about that, or we will talk more about that, the public space in the case of this study. And now, last but not least, democracy is a superlative term when we talk about these 5 countries. They are either not free or just partly free with regards to with regards to freedom of expression or internet freedom, and they are either hybrid or authoritarian regimes in terms of democracy. Well, and all of these situations cause disinformation, actually, and they fuel it, and somehow they lead to measures and initiatives that seek to counter disinformation, either disinformation or misinformation in a public space. And they can have significant effects on the people that are using the digital space to express their opinions, especially the democracy actors. Some of which were cited in this report as a human rights defender, political opposition, political opponents, journalists, media houses, activists, bloggers, and last but not least, citizens. Well, in terms of manifestations of disinformation, the study found that they are very diverse and complex, and classified them into forms and tactics. So there are forms of disinformation and there are tactics. Forms are literally the layout through which the speech of disinformation comes on the public space. And they are most of the times engaging visuals that are very light and require little literacy and little speed and time to be read on the internet. They are also thrilling images that are sometimes taken in totally different contexts to elicit maximum reactions, engagement before they are fact-checked. So people will take, like we saw in Cameroon, people will take images of a conflict that took place in another country, and they will use it on during a period, when a conflict starts somewhere in Cameroon, like in the north of Cameroon. People used images from another country to illustrate it. And that was not what was going on in Cameroon. The picture was not after fact checked. The picture was found to be taken in another country, to have been taken in another country. Apart from that, there are also actors that distort genuine information or pictures to seek a more sensational usage, or on print media sometimes, and platforms to better trigger mass sharing, because when images are very sensational, when they create surprise, when they are attractive in a negative way, of course, they create they trigger mass sharing, and that is the threat of misinformation, and it helps misinformation. In that same vein of sensational, actors of disinformation also resort sometimes to false claims. They use false claims as in forms of text infographics, screenshots, posters, falsely attributed to a public figure, someone who is very well known, or someone who is trending as a public personality. They use it to stir up crowds and create opposed or vindictive reactions. And most of the times, as we found in these countries, this tactics is used by political parties, mostly those who are in power, to tarnish opposition figures. Tactics here relate to various coordinated means that disinformation actors use on the public space, and they are helped with the media or social media, like channels. As the report highlighted, the tactics mostly include political astroturfing, mass brigading, mass sharing, use of social media fake accounts or pseudonyms. Maybe I will not give the complete meaning of these terms that are sometimes very new to people, but I would say that political astroturfing may sound a little strange, but it is actually the tactic of disinformation that is most used by politicians, and especially, I was saying that before, especially those in authoritarian regimes that want to remain in power. Cases have been found in Cameroon and Nigeria. So, and they are mostly helped with mass brigading. So the two tactics are correlated. Mass brigading is the direct corollary of political astroturfing, because those people, those actors of disinformation, they need to tarnish the reputation of others in order to shine on the political arena. And where there is political astroturfing, mass brigading is generally comes forward. For mass sharing, it is less to say that it is the most used tactic when it comes to misinformation. People see images, people see messages, people see infographics, people see videos on their devices. They share without questioning where they are coming from, without questioning their origin and their source, that is on media language. So the study countries are also part of those where Facebook, for example, reported coordinated inauthentic behavior in the last 3 years. That involves the use of bots, trolls, and keyboard armies. And I think Facebook representatives here could relate on this point. That is one of the most growing tactic of disinformation that have been observed in recent years. Well, what are the drivers and trends of disinformation? As drivers, researchers all cited an increase of digital penetration in sample countries with low media literacy levels in almost all countries, with the lucrative nature of disinformation, because we found that people are paid, mostly influencers on social media, are paid in countries like in Kenya. They are paid to spread misinformation, to spread disinformation, to spread false news. And when they share it on their channel, on their pages, they are most viewed. They are kind of opinion leaders in countries, in selected countries. And when they share an information, people first believe before they check it out. There is also the fractious politics, like in Uganda, Kenya. Political arena is not always stable. It looks, but it is not. And there are conflict situations that we mentioned in Cameroon. For example, the Anglophone crisis was the event that brought a lot of disinformation and a lot of arrest of people under the pretense of disinformation. So it's the time, the related situation when people were most arrested, were most threatened because of disinformation. There is also the conflict in Ethiopia, the conflict in Tigray, that brought a great wave of disinformation. And in Nigeria, there have been situations with the bordering conflict with Boko Haram, and also the situation of NSAS, the NSAS protest, when people were criticizing the police governance. There are also, as drivers, the authoritarianism and closure of digital space. People have underlying states of laws, of regulations that contain provisions that infringe free speech, that infringe access to information in some ways, and they use that as pretense. They use that as support to arrest people, to threaten people under the pretense of disinformation. So those are the main the key trends. Sorry, I was talking about the trends. Those are the key trends of disinformation found in those countries, and that can be applied, that can be seen in other sub-Saharan African countries as well. As drivers of disinformation, we found that elections drive waves of disinformation in these countries, mainly through critiques on governance, and mainly through disputed results, internet disruptions, and fake accounts freshly created by news media website. In Cameroon, we found that new accounts and new online pure players media were created at the eve of the 2018 presidential elections. And there are also armed conflicts. Armed conflicts, as I said, they drive great waves of disinformations through the creation of and sharing of false news, old and unrelated, totally uncontextualized pictures, and false claims to incite violence. Now, what are the disinformation perpetrators? Here, we made a distinction between instigators and agents, because there are, on the one hand, those who initiate disinformation campaigns based on their political or whatever stakes, and they are helped by the agents. And those agents are mainly play on dissemination or the spreading of information they receive from the instigators to help their strategies. And sometimes instigators play as agents to drive significant impact on their campaign. They are very tricky, actually. Most of the times, they even play as instigators and agents. Instigator is when sometimes a political party will pay a public relations firm, like we saw in some countries. they will pay a public relation firms to create contents and share on social media to whitewash their reputation, and at the same time create a related or unrelated content to tarnish the opposition's reputation. When the government instigates that, agent is the public the public relations firm that is paid, or the influencer that will take information on the internet that is already on the internet, or that he will be paid to take that information created by the public relations firm and disseminate it through his own channels. That is the agent. So influencers mostly, or social media gurus, they mostly work as agents. And most of the times they also instigate disinformation. So like perpetrators, instigator, and or agents, the study found political actors that include government and non-state actors, political oppositions, because yes, sometimes they do that as well, political groups, because there are groups that are created on social media to support one or another party, a political party, and activists. Sometimes activists are not always those who are trying to make people's right being respected. Others really work like political. They really work for political actors. And social media gurus or digital influencers. Remark, they are often paid because, as I said it before, they are often paid as influencers, as opinion leaders in countries to influence the public opinion, to influence what people think, because they are already influencing people on other public opinion on other grounds, on other, shall it be fashion, shall it be any other economical ground. They are now used with by politicians they are used by politicians to spread their disinformation strategy, and using leveraging on their audience, on their mass audience. And that works in almost all the countries. Also, we have foreign actors. Foreign actors, many studies have informed this part. Foreign actors, they are now playing as disinformation perpetrators, instigators, agents, and all of that in most of the sub-Saharan African countries. Facebook, if we go on their reports on coordinated inauthentic behavior, we'll find that there is a massive Russian or French or many other countries presence in sub-Saharan Africa. And most of the times, people don't know what they are looking for. You will just find shared content and targeted, shared and very targeted content on social media, on Facebook, that is targeted to the audience on each country or another one. So has been very used. And most of the time when governments use public relation firms, they are not from the country where they are from a foreign country. In Cameroon, they used, it has been found that the government, at the eve of 2018 elections, used an American PR firm to publish contents on his on the president's, the then and current president's reputation. So that is what have been found on disinformation perpetrators, that include instigators and agents. On the pathways of disinformation. Now, the study was not only focused on those media, on those social media, because it was a preference. It was mostly because these are media that have brought out the most vibrant waves of disinformation lately. But mainstream media is not at least. Mainstream media has also found to be playing a very significant role in disinformation. For example, in Cameroon, I will cite that example as well, because it's the one present on my mind right now. In Cameroon, the print media used, I talked about tactics and forms. Print media used in Cameroon attractive images, sensational images on their first page to attract people. And people just snap it, they snapshot it, and they share it on their device, and that goes viral on WhatsApp, mainly on WhatsApp. And most of the times, it has been found also that people diverse platforms, that disinformation spreads on social media. The same message can be shared on social media and on the mainstream media. Sometimes it starts on social media and is shared on the mainstream media. Sometimes it's an information that is spread by a very genuine media, like a national television, who shares an information that is totally false, and their social media gurus take it and share it on their pages. That becomes viral on social media. So those are times when disinformation plays on all the grounds, and people don't have possibility to know wherever it is true or false, because very trustable people, very trustable media are sharing it as well. Okay, now talking about responses to disinformation in sample countries. We found that the government have tried to respond. Governments have tried to respond to disinformation, and sometimes they really started many years ago, before we are having this great spread right now and in the last past years. So they have made legislations that include provisions infringing access to information, infringing free expression, or already having some idea about cutting or shutting down the internet whenever there is an issue. Those are states where those are things that governments now use to suppress people under the pretense of disinformation. And these laws have been used in other countries, in some countries, and not yet in others, to really threaten people, to arrest and to put in jail people for disinformation. In Cameroon, for example, there is no specific disinformation law, but many scattered provision on false news are in the cyber security and the cybercrime law. That is back to 2010, that legislation, and the penal code that has been repealed in 2016 with provisions now putting limitations on free speech and talking about false news. In Ethiopia, the hate speech disinformation, the hate speech and disinformation prevention and suppression proclamation was adopted in 2020, and is already being used to arrest journalists, to arrest people. In Kenya, as well as like in Cameroon, there is no specific disinformation as well. Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act, that is from 2018. It is used, it includes also provisions on false news or that make allusion to false news, and as well as the Kenya Information and Communications Act, as well as the National Cohesion and Integration Act that is back to 2008. So there are many laws in the countries like that that are back to many years ago and being used right now to tackle disinformation by the state. In Nigeria as well, there is no specific disinformation law and no clear legal provision on false news, and unclear provision in scattered legislation as well are being used to tackle false news, to arrest people. And now in Nigeria, there is a bill that aims to tackle false news, and it is dated from 2019. The Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulation Bill. Uganda is the same case, has the same situation. No law on disinformation, but many legal provisions on false news, starting with the Penal Code, the Computer Misuse Act, and the Uganda Communications Act. So those are underlying grounds and grounds that help the states to act as they are actually acting, to use disinformation as a pretense to silence critical voices and to silence and to muzzle dissents. Now, about effectiveness of remedial measures put in place by platforms. The report found that there are actually many things the platforms have been doing. The Meta group, mainly with Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram, has put on community guidelines. Twitter has that as well. They has put on content moderation strategies to help people signal, for example, a content that they deem not relevant or false, or another one. They are using, they are working with fact-checking organizations and people in various countries to help the fact-checking process, to help signal harmful content. And they have transparency reporting and very, very improved platforms so far, like the Facebook report on coordinated inauthentic behavior. It's a tool. It's a report that really helps to see what is going on, at least on the geostrategic level, how foreign countries are playing with or without governments, with or without local actors, to manipulate the opinion, to manipulate discourse, to manipulate the public discourse, and what is and to have the stranglehold on what is going on in a country, in a given country at a given moment. But in the face of that, there are many things that still needs to be done, because there are still subsequent concerns in the face of these measures they have put in place. There are concerns like the lack of the privacy concern. When people try to know who the source of an information, it means displaying the identity of a person. That is a bundle of anonymity. So anonymity cannot work, since we want to know actually what a false information is coming from, and people are using that privacy protection to create false accounts, to create to even steal people's identity on social media platforms to disseminate misinformation. So there are many things that have been said about platforms measures, mainly the lack of efficiency and transparency, the threats to digital rights, and like privacy, we said that, and freedom of opinion as well, like muzzling demands of transparency and accountability. Sometimes platforms, they argue that they are bound by local legislations. One more time, we are coming back to those legislations that are already existing in the countries. There are the limitations of public educations and emancipation online. People are not always, we spoke earlier about digital literacy. People don't always know how to use those platforms. And sometimes the community guidelines are there, the content moderation strategies are there, but not everybody has the capacity to read it and understand it and know what to do and know how to use them. And there is a high-handedness in content moderation as well, and unfair account takedowns. Many times there have been reports that from countries that accounts have been taken down following government requests, and those accounts most of the times are from activists that are criticizing the government, and the government will just signal the platform to take down these accounts, and the platform does that without thinking about the consequences of the actually holders of these accounts. There is a limited understanding of local context, culture, and language as well, because most of the times there are very few countries that actually African countries that actually are able to use their local language on platforms, and there are no algorithms to really have a fair translation from these countries from these local languages to other to English or French or most spoken foreign languages in Africa. So there is unfairness about that. Platforms are not actually ready to really address that. They are not really addressing that concern. And there is a widespread of algorithms without adequate human oversight as well. There are many reports of how platforms are using people data, of how they are using, they are analyzing speech, they are analyzing content, and users don't always know how that works. And that it needs to be to be clear, to be transparent. It needs people needs to know that, and it's part of their rights as well. Well, so all of these measures by platforms and governments, they still lack efficiency, they still lack effectiveness, and there's still much to be done. And most of the time, as well as disinformation is impacting, is having negative effects on human rights or on democracy. Remedial measures are also accentuating somehow these effects, these consequences on human rights and democracy. So impacts on electoral processes. Impact on electoral processes are through the energizing or the suppression on voters. The disinformation sets somehow the new agenda because people don't know what is true. People believe what they are seeing, what they are reading, what they are heard, what they are hearing, and it undermines political systems, betraying authoritarian rule, and creates a trail of doubt on the liability of democratic institutions, because and create politically motivated violence. Once people realize that they have been manipulated or they have been told lies by their governments, the consequence is they can't trust the governments anymore. They cannot trust the government anymore. So that is what happens on electoral processes. They don't know who to trust. They don't know who from the opposition or the opposition or the ruling party is being right, who is the best person, because discourse is corrupted. It perpetuates hate speech, like in multi-ethnic and fractious societies. We have seen that in many of the countries. All of them as well, of the sample countries have that profile. That leads to political unrest and instability. People start hating those from other tribes, other ethnics, and the discourse becomes very ethnocentric and ethnocentric. Yes. Yes, and they create a very ethnocentric discourse and accentuates hatred among the population. It also disinformation also undermines free speech and free flow of information, as well as access to true and reliable information. Most of the times, we have seen how trustable, we have thought about trustable media use disinformation to change public opinion. How influencers, those who are who have a very big audience on social network and who actually are influencing, as their name says, are influencing the public opinion. They are influencing a very a large part of the population. Sometimes they will have millions of followers. They are influencing millions of people by what they are sharing. And if it's just, it just has to be a false news, false information that many people will believe. They will believe before the fact check. And most of the time, fact checking process takes very long. It takes very long before people know. And sometimes before people know, they have already reacted. They have already done something related to what they already knew. And that was actually false. So that is how disinformation really hampers integrity of information and opinions. It serves on as a pretense to crack down on legitimate expression. The state is also the first to shut down the internet in many countries when there are conflicts and or political related protests, or sometimes just socioeconomic related crisis and so on. In Nigeria, that happens very regularly. They shut down the internet, and when internet is shut down, people can't access many sources of information, and they can only rely to what they are receiving. And what happens when the only media channel they are having is the national media channel that is not actually reliable, because it has shown in some countries not to be reliable, to share false information. So that is all what happens. People live in doubt. People live in self-censorship because they don't know who to trust. They can't even talk by themselves because they are afraid to be arrested or to be prosecuted. In conclusion, we found, if I may take it all together like this, we found that disinformation is a very well-developed strategy that displays through various forms and tactics, through various means, through various means, especially in times of ethnic, political, religious, or other socioeconomic tensions. It is leveraged. It leverages on the rise of internet and mobile penetration in the countries, and also at the same time on the low level of digital literacy. Many people use it. Many people use digital devices, but they don't know how to use it. They don't know best ways to use it. They are not well prepared for that. And disinformation mostly spreads through media, social media, or both channels at the same times. Main perpetrators, as the study found, are governments, foreign actors, social media gurus, or influencers. These are not just main key perpetrators, because we are not forgetting the fact that the report tells about that, the fact that sometimes individuals do play that role. Individuals, unknown people, do play the role of sharing when they don't have sufficient digital literacy to think about fact-checked. And as effects of disinformation, it hampers the free flow of information and access to true and reliable information. It limits the freedom of speech and opinion and perpetuates hate speech. And as a response, governments rather use it as a weapon in their legislations to silence critical voices. As a response as well from the platforms part, they are yet to find a better way to address it without collateral damage on people's rights, and also without being the government's allies, because governments use them to suppress dissent as well, taking down accounts and so on. On this note, we had some very, actually they are not few, there are many recommendations, but here I just took very few of them. The most important to know here is that it is a very multifaceted concern that includes that involves various stakeholders, and it is less to say that we are all in this together. All of the people, will they be working for the government, for the platforms, for the media, and or civil society or international organizations, and many other stakeholders. They are all in this. They all play a great role they all can play a great role in tackling disinformation or misinformation. So on this note, I will say a big thank you to everyone who has paid a kind attention to listen. And maybe I was too fast or too low. I hope not. And the report is there for the information, and I really hope this will open a broader conversation, and after that we can still work together in order to address those the advocacy and to work on the advocacy and so on. So thank you very much. The mic is up to you, Jan.
Thank you very much, Simone. Don't worry about your pace, because if the feedback is anything to go by, Asen Tungali says that's a great report. Justin Ernstein says, I think it's one of the most thorough and insightful produced so far on the issue in Africa. I think I did see another compliment. I saw someone says that, thank you for sharing the full report. Michelle, I'll come back to you. And then Katab Hamad says, great presentation and a great report. Thank you once again, Simone. I'm very excited for the next part of this roundtable discussion, which is kind of we're going into a panel discussion, and as well as just reflecting on some of the issues that Simone has presented to us. But let me just remind you a few things. Of course, this session is also live on YouTube, and whenever you'd like to raise a concern, a question, or a pointer, please use the chat box, and I'll be happy to pick it up, or also just give you a chance to speak as well. Without further ado, let me just invite, or rather introduce to you my very well balanced panel, which I'm excited to speak to as well. We have Jean Elon, who will be representing the Facebook platform, and of course the larger Meta as we now know it. She is Facebook's program manager for human rights and social good in Africa. She's a political analyst with over 10 years of experience in research, project management, and strategic leadership. We'll also be speaking to Morgan Wack from the University of Washington. He is in the Department of Political Science, and his expertise is in the area of, looking at the increase of new technologies, violence, and barriers to growth in developing countries. So we'd really like to hear his thoughts about the report as well. And of course, we'll have Simone Tosi, who we've just heard from. She is Project Officer for Central Africa under CIPESA. And then finally, we have Justin Ernstein, who is the founder and executive director of Africa's largest investigative technology and data journalism initiative, that is Code for Africa. I'm thinking most of them, if all of them, will probably have their videos on. It would be nice for us to see them as they speak. And then this is just for my panelists. Let's try to make the points short and precise so that we can try to cover as much as possible. Now, Jean, I'm going to start with you from a Facebook perspective, because Michelle Ndoki has raised a very valid point. But even before that, let me just take note of what Nkosa Manganyi says. That she's already logged out. She says, similar to some accidents of disinformation in South Africa, old pictures have been used to fuel anger and unrest, mainly when we've seen xenophobic attacks. This is just in response to what Simone was talking about. Now, then we are seeing a question here, or a comment from Michelle Ndoki, who says, I am not really sure the identified measures are remedying the identified issues. For instance, she doubts that Facebook agents think sincerely that in our countries, shutting down activists' account is helping reduce disinformation. She suggests a study to compare and identify the profile of people whose accounts are shut down. Maybe Jeannie can talk to us about what decisions, as you respond to Michelle, what kind of brings you to a decision to, in a way, block an account or deactivate an account for being found to spread disinformation?
Hello, sorry. Thank you for the great questions and the really brilliant presentation. I'd like to start by just updating my current role at Meta. It's a pleasure to be here with Sipesa and all these really thoughtful experts from around the continent. It's been such a pleasure listening to the research and learning. While I used to occupy that position at Meta, I'm now the global lead for Meta's Trusted Partner Program, which in many ways speaks to one of the main recommendations from the report, which is how we can strengthen relationships with expert civil society organizations to better understand content trends and address them in partnership. I want to give a little bit more background on my current role at Meta, because I think it also speaks to some of the trends that Simone shared, which is that I sit within the content policy team, which is the team that writes the rules for what is and what is not allowed on the platform. And within that team, I actually sit on a team that focuses on external stakeholder engagement. And the purpose of our work is really to ensure that our policies and enforcements reflect the expertise, knowledge, and understanding of communities around the globe. Many of the folks on this call have been interviewed by my colleagues in the past when we're reviewing our policies. And in fact, one of the organizations that was mentioned as contributing to the report is a member of the Global Trusted Partner Network. So in some respects, I hope that we're already working towards the solutions that the report points to. And so that's very gratifying. To the questions that were asked and the points raised, I think the report lays out quite well the prevalence and the way that manipulated images and manipulated videos contribute to misinformation. In fact, those instances are some of the easier forms of misinformation to identify and tackle, because we can do reverse image searches, we can identify where the videos were originally from, and on that basis, we can debunk the information, challenge its veracity, and inform users so that they can kind of be consuming information on our platforms with that knowledge. One area of misinformation that I didn't see come out, but which I would love to hear from the experts in the room, is about unverifiable rumors. So this is misinformation that we understand can lead to both online harm and offline harm, but it's very difficult to verify whether the rumor is in fact correct. In some cases, this can occur during conflict when authoritative information about what's actually going on during the conflict is not available, because there's a bit of an information vacuum because of the insecurity. It can also happen when it is rumors about historical grievances or historical animosities that play on the perceptions and the mentalities that are prevalent in a society. And it's very difficult to get at the truth. What's actually happening? Has one group actually done something? Or is it just a type of educated guess, which is also a manipulation because it is stoking underlying societal fears and tensions? I actually agree with Michelle's comment about the recommendations not necessarily addressing some of the main perpetrators of misinformation. And I actually appreciate the call to action with respect to future directions for research. As somebody who comes from the civil society space myself, I know that sometimes actions taken by platforms can look like a targeted attack against an individual. As another person in the chat correctly raised, oftentimes account takedowns are the result of violations of policies by the individuals themselves. And the best way to address that is, in fact, not necessarily by looking for the perpetrator in the space of government or social media influencers, but it's more about education, so that our activist community, our thought leaders, when they're using these platforms, can do so from an informed perspective and therefore not inadvertently violate policies that result in account suspensions or feature limitations, et cetera. I'm going to stop there because I know that there might be some follow-up questions, but I'm happy to speak more about the work of the content policy team and how we engage with stakeholders. But overall, the report was really shed a lot of light on these key trends, and I'm eager to see where we can take it a bit deeper and further to operationalize those recommendations. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Jen. Let me bring in Morgan. Part of the issues raised by the report and presented by Simone is that disinformation, especially targeting the political landscape, is on the rise, perpetrated by both local and foreign actors. We kind of saw who the local and foreign actors are. But as you react to this, Morgan, what impact does it have to the growth of developing countries?
Thanks for that, Ian, and thanks to everybody for having me here today. I appreciate being invited in. I had the pleasure of serving as kind of an external reviewer on this report. I'm based out of the University of Washington, where I basically work as a research fellow for the Center for an Informed Public. We do a lot of work on election integrity, looking specifically at mis and disinformation, both in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in the United States and many other countries. Fortunately, mis and disinformation are a worldwide phenomenon these days, and so it's not just in developing countries, and it never has been. And I think the report speaks to a lot of these interesting issues, as did Simone in her wonderful presentation. The specific question about kind of development and how disinformation interacts with the development process, I think a lot of this has to do with democratization. I think the report, by kind of specifically selecting countries that are, it's labeled here in the report as hybrid regimes or partially free regimes, get at a lot of these interesting questions that tie disinformation to larger issues in politics, but also development, which are heavily intertwined. I think, as Jean just noted, the report really touches on such a wide range of things that we could really pick any one of them and talk for another 20 minutes about every interesting aspect. And it really does put a lot of threads forward for us to follow up in future research. One thing I'll point out here, just to keep things relatively brief, as an example for your question, would be the influencers for hire that is mentioned in the report, which I thought was a fascinating component, and one that I think ties kind of the specific context of a lot of these countries to the misinformation phenomenon. And in this, you can kind of see that the economics of sub-Saharan Africa and in these particular countries really is a massive vulnerability for misinformation that's created by individual people. When you have incentives from outside the continent for influence over foreign elections, over foreign political processes, over foreign development and ties to a country, being able to pay relatively minimal sums in other currencies to have people create local kind of pieces of misinformation, whether it's something as advanced as a deepfake or something as simplistic as a tailored Twitter message or Facebook post. This is a massive problem because it really creates an industry for misinformation that may or may not be as easy to kind of contend with or combat as in other countries or other regions. And I think these are some of the areas that this report really brings out a lot of evidence in support of. And I'm hoping that it can be a basis for more investment in determining how exactly these financial pathways kind of allow for targeted accounts from outside the continent to really influence, especially elections, but other kind of high intensity and high likelihood events, such as kind of economic development processes and development context more generally. And so I won't dig too much further into that. I'm happy to follow up with other questions that people can reach out to me about that. But that's just one area where I think this report is extremely fascinating, and I hope people read more about the kind of influence for hire portion of the report, which I thought was excellently done.
Yeah, and maybe, Morgan, before I let you go, there's a very interesting question from Jeff Omwaki in regards to influencers for hire. Mm-hmm. He says, perhaps, did the report, or should we maybe go a bit deeper to find out the channels through which influencers are contracted, maybe understanding the kind of engagement they have and the contract they have with whoever is hiring them, because he argues that if we understand the supply chain pipeline, then it kind of becomes an easier way to address this issue of influencers for hire. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think, forensic accounting is one way that you can kind of get at a lot of these. Anytime there's a money trail, that at least allows you to have some sort of opportunity to follow and see who's actually paying the bills on a lot of these things, whether it be domestic or foreign actors. I think while it's troubling, and I think it's a massive problem that we're going to see only increase as my mobile phones and ICT spread throughout much of the continent in the next decade or so. It is also an area for kind of improved innovation on behalf of governments and civil society actors like CPESA to dig into that and kind of figure out who is exactly driving these trends. So yeah, I think it's a terrific point.
All right, thank you for that. Let me bring in Justin. Maybe Justin, you could respond to what Jean said at first, that unverifiable rumors, of course, makes it very difficult for even platforms like Facebook and fact checkers to kind of deal with, especially in the spur of the moment. We saw, for instance, when at the beginning of COVID-19, when there was hardly any information about the virus, this is the time when misinformation and disinformation was spreading very quickly. What is your advice about such moments in terms of countering disinformation, in light of unverifiable rumors, which are very difficult to verify?
Hi, guys. Yes, so I think that's a really important point, because what we're really facing here is a whole of society problem. And the big weakness in how civil society and the platforms and everyone else has tried to tackle it has been that we are being too narrow in our responses. Fact checkers definitely have a place. We run the largest fact checking initiative in Africa. It's in 12 countries, and it's part of the Meta program that you heard about earlier. And they are helping take down up to 5 million or label 5 million posts sorry, I'll start my video. 5 million posts per year are being labeled as misleading as a result of their work, but it's a fraction of the problem. And so what we try and do is a multi-pronged approach. And that means that we have the fact checkers who basically are debunking, almost whack-a-mole, the individual claims. You need a bunch of people like we are the host for DFR Labs in Africa. They're out of our Cape Town offices. We have another team out of Cape Town and Khartoum and Dakar that also does network analysis. You need to join the dots between the claims and figure out the networks. And the people who are doing that are not journalists. They're data scientists, forensic researchers, working alongside fact checkers who come from a journalistic media background. And then we have a third team of AI machine learning experts who try and understand the deeper lying tropes and narratives that make us as society susceptible to these kind of conspiracy theories and the narratives that the influencers for hire build on. And then we've got actually a fourth team that looks at this economy that you heard. And in fact, our colleagues at Twitter's threat disruption team feel that Kenya is a global hotspot for an emerging startup culture that specializes in this influencer for hire. A lot of this, as you've seen in the comments, a lot of the research that people have been saying is that the infrastructure, because basically these influencers for hire are building commercial infrastructure. They're building audiences, they're priming those audiences, and then they're inserting messages on behalf of clients as needed. But that infrastructure is often being built on top of blueprints or playbooks. First the clients are usually domestic, but the playbooks are being developed by foreign state actors. And here we see Russia or the Wagner mercenary group and others building massive transnational networks to amplify and then franchising those out to influencers for hire. So you've got a combination, firstly, in answer to your question, you've got to really internalize this fact that it's an economy that we're dealing with here. It's a profiteering, clickbait economy, firstly. Secondly, that a pure debunk fact-checking response is not going to get you anywhere. It's a cottage industry. It does not scale. And that's from the largest fact-checking organization on the continent. So you need to have multiple approaches to tackling this, and you need to build ecosystems that deal with the problem. No single organization, no single coalition is going to really move the needle. We need to have a number of coalitions working together as an agile, evolving ecosystem.
All right, thank you for that. You've actually just answered my next question in terms of how do we, because from what you're saying, it seems, influencers for hire is becoming an increasing trend. And so how can, governments and actors like CPESA and yourselves kind of curtail this coming stop this trend growing?
So yeah, it's an economy, and so you've got to demonetize it, and you demonetize it by building the infrastructure that these startups are investing massive amounts of resources and kind of people power, kind of time into building. You take that away and they don't have a product to sell to the next politician who wants to run a smear campaign, or to the next kind of foreign client who wants to polarize an electorate or fuel violence like in Mali or in the Central African Republic. So we need to demonetize, and that means burning the online assets. It's unpopular, but you need to deplatform the agents who are driving this. With our colleagues at DFR Lab and my colleagues, some of them who are on the call here from the iLab, they've mapped out thousands of accounts that amplify as a commercial service the kinds of inflammatory videos that Wagner are putting out at the moment. This week are busy pushing out in Mali, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, and buying into jihadist kind of narratives as well as a commercial service. That drives people onto the streets in protests. In Nigeria, we've seen religious-driven disinformation in the last 2 weeks result in violent protests that lead to physical harm and damage. So we need to be deplatforming the infrastructure. We need to be very careful that we are not curtailing real civil liberties or kind of free speech in the process. So that's the one thing that we need to be doing. The second thing we need to be doing is penalizing the people who are investing into this and hiring the influencers for hire. Israel has built a surveillance industry. We really genuinely don't want East Africa to be the global kind of go-to place for derailing digital democracies.
What happens in instances? Okay, I think I'll come back to you, Justin. Let me bring in Simone, because Simone, part of the report says African governments and political leaders have increasingly seen social media as a threat that provides the public with greater access to information, enables mobilization to challenge the status quo. And we're seeing kind of double standards emerge here. For instance, in Cameroon in 2018, the presidential elections brought a strong wave of disinformation. At one point we see the minister kind of warning the public about using social media carelessly in a sense, but then at the same time, Cameroon or even the government was ahead to hire foreign companies to spruce up the government's image. So let's talk a bit about this double standard that we are seeing for government when it comes to setting up laws. Simone, how can we address this?
Yes, Jan, I got the point from the beginning, but the question, your last question, I didn't hear it very well. Can you please remind me? Thank you.
Maybe how can we address the double standards we're seeing from government? On one hand, they kind of, show that they have the goodwill to address disinformation, but then at the same time, if you really look or read between the lines, it's kind of to tackle dissenting voices, as you had mentioned earlier. So how do we address this?
That question is a very good question, but at the same time, a very complicated one, because that is one of the main reasons why such a report has been conducted. The governments, they really want people to access good and reliable, true and reliable information. But at the same time, they are using legislations. They are using even policies. They are using. They are preventing people from using social media in certain ways, and now they know that they already have provisions in laws that they will use to suppress dissenting voices, and actually they are already using it. The point is, we cannot act as Justin just said that people need to work together. No single action, no individual action. People need to work together. If we want to tackle it, we need to work with the government. We as civil society organizations, we as the academia, we as the legal, as the court representatives and so on, parliamentarians, we need to work alongside of the governments to better tackle this. Working alongside of them means reports like this, studies like this needs to reach the government. They need to be addressed to the government. Government needs to know that actually they already know that they have limiting provisions in the legislations, but they need to know that now we know, and now we don't want it to be used against us. We don't want it to be used against democracy actors. So when we carry out research, when we do things like that, we need to join the government representatives actually to our action. It needs to be a synergy. It needs to be a concerted action, a collaborative action. And I think, I'm not sure about that, but I think that if the government is seeing what it is causing, even when they want to really cause that harm, if they are working with people trying to tackle it, I think they will reduce what they want to do. That is, if they don't totally repeal those provisions, they can actually modify them. So that is what I can say about that. That is, we need to work with them. We need to really work with the governments.
Thank you, Simone. Let me bring in Jean, because Jean, there seems to be a concern, and I'm reading Michelle's point here again. She says, my point is that more and more activists, not only in Africa, are raising concerns that Facebook is silencing them. A form of shadow ban has been denounced, with followers not receiving notifications of the new postings, and therefore audiences going down and down. You could respond to that. But what I'm also getting from Michelle's point is that perhaps there seems to be a need for clear guidelines when accounts are taken down and for the reasons in which the actions are taken against them. Maybe you can talk to us about that, Jen.
Sure, thanks, Ian, and thank you for the questions, Michelle. I actually really appreciate the critical engagement because it helps us improve. Of course, we're aware of the challenge of shadow bans and the impact of account and feature limitations on thought leaders and activists who really play a central role in the civic ecosystem around the globe. The challenge is really around how we can share information about when these feature limitations are put in place without empowering bad actors to circumvent them. Because I think it's also, we need to recognize that the issues that we're discussing today, as Justin said, it's a society-wide problem, and it's very difficult to attack in a piecemeal fashion. So while Meta operates at a global scale and is generally trying to balance the need to protect freedom of expression while keeping our global communities safe, of course, we admit that errors take place, that there are false positives that occur, and we try to create effective remediation methods and appeals systems. The Trusted Partner Program that I spoke about earlier is one mechanism. Actually, CIPESA at one point was able to participate in that program. I think that there just needs to be more channels of communication so that when activist accounts are impacted, there's a speedy way to recover them and to correct false positives if they occur. And of course, more broadly, we just need better information and better digital literacy about how to use these platforms in a way that can avoid those types of feature limitations so that activists don't get inadvertently caught. But I actually want to ask another question, which I neglected to ask during my first intervention, which is, I'm interested from my background in research before joining tech and even before joining civil society about what the research has uncovered about authoritarian learning. Are we seeing that these countries are kind of learning from each other, that governments are adopting the tactics that they've seen were effective in other places to silence dissent, to control civic discourse? And if so, I think that research that lets us kind of proactively identify when these tactics are being deployed would be extremely useful, not only for social media companies, but also for anyone interested in supporting democracy, that kind of, are there precursor behaviors that we should be on the lookout for that mean that a government is kind of going down this path, that they're going to start using certain strategies and tactics in a way that we've seen before, so that we can be more proactive rather than waiting for the harms to occur.
Thank you very much, Jean, for that. Actually, that's a lovely question, and Michelle agrees. And I'll bring in Simone. Are we seeing countries learning from each other in terms of trying to either deal with disinformation or try to kind of control this particular space? For instance, if Uganda, has applied taxation on social media, is Kenya or Nigeria, the neighboring countries, are they picking up? And are we seeing that as a trend? I think that is what Jean is trying to address, Simone.
Yeah, please, I'm having network skirts. I'm really sorry about that. Was the question for me?
Yes, the question was for you. Basically,
okay,
just to sum it up, Jean is asking a very lovely question in terms of, are we seeing authoritarian governments or just governments across the continent learning from each other in terms of dealing with the digital space when it comes to combating disinformation, or perhaps even going to the extent of using it as a scapegoat to curtail dissenting voices?
How the governments are learning from.
Are they learning from each other?
Yes, actually they're learning from each other, because it can we don't have a report about how they learn, about them learning from each other. They can't say that they are learning from each other, but we know when something becomes a trend concerning a political landscape and in a country, generally it is taken up by the other government, especially since those governments have similarities. We talked about these similarities in terms of trends that and drives of disinformation. Most of these, the main of these similarities are they are authoritarianism. When a government, when there is a president in power that doesn't want to move, someone said in the chat that disinformation is profitable to them. They use it. They are the principal beneficiaries of disinformation. So when they see a trend going on in a country, it is simple for them to apply it, as well as applying trends, legal trends in their countries. When an act is adopted, when an act is adopted in one country, it is most of the times taken up by another country. That generally we have gone through those legislations, and you'll be surprised to hear that most of the times they really look alike. It's sometimes like a copy-pasted legislation. So those are indicators that show that, okay, these people are sometimes copying and pasting laws without even taking into consideration contextual realities, contextual issues, and so on. So that's the point.
But James Omadai says it's as though they're in the same WhatsApp group. Maybe there's one that exists and we are not aware when it comes to sharing about legislation. Justin, I can see your hand is up. I'm hoping you'd like to respond to whether governments are sharing or rather copying each other when it comes to legislation. Over to you.
Yeah, I'd wanted to just flag that we actually need to go deeper than governments. Political parties are learning from each other and are in fact exchanging strategists and youth leaders between each other, and they're learning the strategies for mobilizing, for dissenting, for polarizing their electorates. In fact, we see, and this is not just between African political parties. So we see, for example, youth leaders in South Africa being flown out to mainland China to undergo social media training. and come back with a playbook where they're doing copy pasting, they're doing brigading, they're doing all the kind of classic kind of strategies for disinformation. We see the same thing in the DRC. So I think that we need to start looking, it's not just governments. Governments are the same problem with disinformation. Disinformation is not the problem. Disinformation is the symptom. What we're talking about here is coordinated influence operations. And they're often perpetrated either by a cabal within an economy or within a political party, or by a party itself that is using guerrilla tactics to unseat a bigger incumbent, or to silence critics. And we need to be focusing down on that, because if we're just saying it's governments, we're not going to solve the problem. We need to be zeroing in on who the actual perpetrators are and holding them accountable.
Thanks for that, Justin. Let me bring in Morgan. And Morgan, you can respond to Rosemary's comment, which is actually quite a valid point. She says there's a huge challenge working with governments because in many African countries, the government is the biggest and most well-resourced perpetrator of disinformation. Yet at the same time, they are supposed to be central when it comes to fighting or addressing the symptom that is disinformation.
Yeah, of course, it's a great point. Unfortunately, it's not just in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, governments, I think if you look back at sort of the longer run trends in most technologies, but including information research and communications technologies, the trend seems to be something like, there's initially an opening for civil society and for civic space to utilize a new technology to kind of fight back against existing oppression and sort of, the chains that are holding particular equilibrium in place. And then as things become more complex, you have the investment on behalf of particular governments who have the resources and capabilities to manage those communications channels and to manage public opinion that sort of fight back against civil society and make it increasingly more difficult for groups to come together and for individuals to come together to kind of speak out freely and to promote democracy and other forms of democratic development. In our current state of affairs, I think governments, as another question touched on earlier, have become increasingly sophisticated in their use of social media platforms and social technologies to limit the amount of civic space, to use both legal and extra-legal methods for combating attempts to democratize and attempts to grow grassroots organizations that promote some, instances and organizations that are perhaps contrary to governments in power. I think particularly this report focused on a lot of countries that are kind of at the edge of democratic openness. I think while this is a great contribution, I think we shouldn't forget that there are also a number of countries in Africa that are not so inclined to use these resources for nefarious means and that are hoping to promote across Africa open resources for organizations to use and to spread to individuals and other groups to hopefully use these technologies as the liberating technologies we all hoped they would be at the beginning of the 2010s and before that. And so I think fighting back against governments themselves has always been an operating principle of civil society organizations, and organizations like CPESA continue to do great work in that area. The problem is that as governments become more sophisticated, it becomes more challenging to kind of bring these instances of abuse to light. And I think the best we can do is to try to collaborate together in areas and spaces like this so that we can share, just as governments are doing, share best practices, share ways of getting out information about how governments are using these technologies to repress individual voices and to repress civil society actors across the continent. And I think that's sort of where a lot of groups like CPESA can come in, and hopefully we'll be able to build a community that can fight back against the worst abusers.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. Let me bring in Jin. As we speak about governments, in what position do you, as Facebook and Meta in general, find yourselves, for instance, when we see governments like Uganda in the past where they've blocked your social media sites, and does it put you at an awkward position in terms of your values and guidelines? Because part of your aim is to ensure that people stay connected and their voices can be heard.
Yes, absolutely. It does put us in an awkward position. I would say two things. First of all, we have an entire team that covers the Sub-Saharan Africa region and is responsible for our public policy. So they would be the best place to speak to this question. But at a high level, yes, Facebook, Meta, the purpose of our platform, our mission is to build community and bring the world closer together by facilitating communication, relationship building, and expression. Ultimately, when governments shut down the internet, restrict access to our services, we find that it's a disservice both to freedom of expression, but also to all of the economic activity that takes place on our platforms, including connections related to health. There's been a lot of studies done, some by folks on this call, about the impact of internet disruptions. And so it's very expansive in its unfortunate impacts. And so as much as possible, we try to work with legitimate governments to help them understand the use cases for our platforms so that they don't find the need to shut them down. Overall, I would say, though, that we actually have, amongst platforms, one of the most rigorous transparency efforts. We have a whole transparency center. We recently published an updates to our community standards enforcement report, which includes transparency around government takedown requests and whether and in which context we've complied and in which context we've rejected those requests. So I actually think I'm pleased that Meta is a topic of conversation for today's meeting, because it speaks to our efforts to be more transparent and to provide the information necessary to have this dialogue with social media platforms. I think that one thing that could be done is to push other platforms to do the same. I think that the more we understand about the communication and the requests that are taking place between governments and platforms, the better it equips civil society stakeholders who hold those governments accountable to be empowered with the information they need to change those dynamics or to influence them. But as I said, I don't have the details because it's not exactly my role, but I'm happy to connect you all with the folks that cover the region.
And perhaps before I let you go, Jane, our question to you would be, sentiments that are coming up is that governments are indeed part of the biggest perpetrators of disinformation. Does Facebook or Meta in general take the same action it does on governments like it does on individuals who are found to be guilty of this?
Very good question. Our content policies apply to all users on our platform, regardless of whether they're a human rights defender, a president of a country, or a leader, a minister, a school teacher. If a user on our platforms violates our policies, which are wide-ranging in scope from hate speech, misinformation to bullying and harassment, safety, and exploitation, the same action is taken. There is no double standard where a political candidate or a person in political office is afforded more liberties than normal users. In fact, these policies are some of the questions in which we come to seek the advice and guidance of experts like yourselves, especially with respect to the treatment of political figures on our platforms. In some cases, in fact, we give them less protections than average users because we allow average users, non-candidates, non-political figures, to be more critical of politicians because we consider it part of public discourse. So overall, there's no double standard. The policies are applied the same across the globe, which is a challenge in and of itself. But I think that it's about equality of arms and equality of resources, right? We recognize as a platform, but also as individuals who have lived in different parts of the world, that use of our platforms is dominated by those who have the best resources, the resources to hire the PR firms, the resources to have wonderful comms departments that are staffed by experts who know how to use our platforms in ways that average users don't. And I think that that is often the asymmetry that puts, as people in the chat have been saying, civil society on the back foot, which is that governments can mobilize more resources to dominate platforms in terms of public discourse and in terms of the way they use our services. And we need to equip civil society better so that they can keep up and so that there's more of an equal debate going on. Yeah. So that's all I can share there.
Just a quick question from Rosemary for you, Jen. Does Meta place fact-checking labels on posts of politicians?
Rosemary, that's a good one. So in fact, this comes to the treatment of political speech is a very complicated subject. And it's one that could take hours of our time to discuss in detail. But generally speaking, when political propaganda and, let's say, political speech that paints facts in a very self-serving way is not new. It has always taken place, whether it is through print media or in social media. Ultimately, though, politicians, when they use our services, we want to strike the right balance between informing the public about what politicians are actually saying and removing misinformation that can lead to imminent harm or violence. So in general, information that is published by politicians but is found to be factually incorrect is not fact-checked, because politicians, they represent a political position, right? And so they often will color the facts or present it in a certain way to sway public opinion, and that's part of politics. We will fact check when they are making incorrect statements that can lead to what we consider imminent risk and societal harm, and we will even take down posts when they meet that threshold. But in general, our approach to misinformation is to remove misinformation that violates our policies, inform on misinformation that has been fact-checked by third-party fact-checkers, and then to inform the public when that fact-checking has taken place by providing a link to an article by a certified fact-checker that debunks the information that's been shared.
All right, thank you very much for that, Jen. Raymond Mujone, I can see a question in regards to what is the success rate of weeding out disinformation off the platform. If we have time, we'll come back to that. I'd like to bring in Morgan because part of the explanations by some governments whenever it comes to passing laws kind of to manage the digital space is, for instance, governments say that it is about, when it comes to matters economy, it's about tapping into new markets for taxation and a way of generating revenue. What do you think about this kind of thinking? Because some actors see this as just an excuse to kind of manage social media platforms. Sorry for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you have either financial or political interests at hand, you're going to find excuses, abundant excuses to justify involvement in certain sectors. I think we see that in the report with the discussion about the use of kind of anti-defamation lawsuits and the legal system to fight back against fake news in a way that just represses and suppresses free speech. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what more you want me to say on that particular issue. I'd be happy to follow up with people specifically, but I think governments, particularly governments that are self-interested in sustaining their time and power, are always going to be on the forefront, or at least hoping to be on the forefront of utilizing the technology and the social systems available to them to sort of manage both economic systems so that they can reward, inner circle politicians so that they don't face threats from within their own groups, but also kind of external social relations, which is where this comes together, right? You want to be able to sustain finances for your group or your group of politicians while also not coming off as so self-serving so as to lose access to foreign aid or access to external channels of legitimizing support. So this is a sort of a long-winded way of saying justification will always happen, particularly for governments self-interested in economics, which is most governments.
Yeah. Justin, let me bring you in so that we can talk about from the perspective of user end. We're seeing that, the more there's internet penetration or use of mobile devices and the likes, the more we're seeing disinformation increase, but at the same time, literacy levels remain low. How can we address this?
So, I mean, there are a bunch of digital literacy programs out there. I think the more important thing that I want to push back on, though, is that low penetration rates doesn't reduce the threat or the harm caused by digital or online disinformation. In fact, it often increases. So we work extensively in the Central African Republic, Mali, Niger, and similar countries where internet penetration is really low. But that means that the people who do have access have a disproportionate amount of influence as a gateway, a human internet almost, who are accessing this information, and they're disseminating it through non-digital means into their communities. And I think it's really important that someone does a detailed critical case study of how Wagner weaponized community grassroots radio through kind of feeding disinformation to them via WhatsApp and email group channels, but also social media channels. And then it's disseminated on radio, where it's very difficult to track. And it feeds on people's fear of the kind of jihadist insurgency that was happening and the pushback against governments. In the link that I shared online, you'll see that they produced a whole bunch of really slickly produced animated films that were deliberately produced as short form for distribution on WhatsApp and other dark social groups. But they also, alongside that, produced printed out graphic comics that could be disseminated to young kids and to youth that push the same story. And it's quite explicit. They're framing Wagner mercenaries as avenging, protecting angels who come to protect ordinary Central African Republic citizens from zombie insurgents. We see exactly the same strategies in Mali, in Niger, and elsewhere. And so often these strategists have a digital online kind of playbook. It goes alongside an offline strategy. And then it's amplified by their investments into mainstream media. So in Central African Republic and elsewhere, we see investments into radio stations that then amplify through call-in shows and through various other media or kind of formats, amplify the messaging that's already happening. Everyone focuses on misinformation on social media platforms, and we forget that word of mouth is often where rumor mongering started in the first place. We need to be focusing on that with the same level of intensity that we do and that we do on the platforms. Sorry, I wasn't very coherent there, but it's something that I feel very strongly about.
No, thank you, Justin. Actually, that's a very good point that, we constantly think about social media and the internet as kind of the only way disinformation or misinformation spreads, but also actually word of mouth is another way that we should be tackling. I'm going to take final rounds of comments now, but I'll start with Simon. We have a good question from Abel Obela, who's asking more about the report. He's simply saying, what is the next step of using this research? Are we going to have an engagement with major stakeholders? Is there any regional or national dissemination plan? So what next, basically, Simon?
Thank you, Abel. Yes, thank you, Abel. That is a good question. Actually, that is the ending points of the report. It is what are we going to do with the report? How are we going to use it? This is the first step. This meeting, this roundtable is the first step of talking about the report and saying, okay, we at CIPESA have tried to do something on disinformation, and that is what we have found. We found out, and next steps will be, and we hope they will not be. We will not be doing that alone as CIPESA. It will be. Further disseminating the report, having a workshop with other stakeholders to talk about the findings of the report, to address the issues, the main issues that the report points out, and to see how together as stakeholders, how we can better address it. And once we find out how we can better address it, the next step is action. We try to address it and together. So we can wait for workshops in specific countries with through partners and we can ask you that are present here as participants to share it as well, wherever you can and whenever you see it needful to be shared, because it is really a common action. We really need people to talk about it. We need people to hear about it, to know about what is going on in terms of disinformation, and try to tackle it all together. So that is what we can oversee as next steps.
All right. Thanks, Simon. I'd also just like to hear from Wakabi as well, just perhaps on the same question in regards to the next steps for the report. Wakabi.
Thank you. We would like everybody to write a story about the report. I think that's in our power, all of us, to do. If you use Twitter, you can tweet. If you have a blog, you can blog. If you don't have any of them, you can write in mainstream media. We would also like to see people take up some of the recommendations that are at the end of the report. They are addressed at different stakeholders. Each of us here belongs to one of those stakeholder groups. So you can pick up something and run with it. Simone has said, we are happy to hear ideas from other actors, what they think we can do next with this report. But some of the things we think would be good to do is dissemination within other quarters. They may be more targeted as specific groups, or they may be mixed groups. The other one might be, engagements with the actors that are able to do something about this. But there are also, from the conversation here, there are also some other areas which require additional research. Like I stated at the beginning, the aim here is for us to inform advocacy, for us to inform further research. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Wakabi, for that. From there, we go to Justin. You mentioned two things that I thought actually stood out, that we need to, fight disinformation, misinformation from all platforms, not just assuming that, government is, the main stakeholder. There are other agents that also come to play. Maybe you can give us your final word in regards to that.
Happy to. So the most successful disinformation actors, whether they're the for-hire entrepreneurs or the nation state or organized crime kind of purveyors of disinformation, deliberately operate at higher than national level. They operate regionally so that they are beyond the radar and the reach of a nation state or regulatory agency, or they try and activate at grassroots level. And we need to understand that they are deliberately evading our radars. Most civil society and most media groups operate at national level. And there's no way we are going to be able to shadow box them if we cannot see them. So we need to start thinking wider than our national ghettos that we live in, our nation states, and start looking at regional networks, firstly. Secondly, we need to start thinking beyond activism, beyond media as watchdogs. We need to start pulling in forensic data scientists, network analysts, open source investigators. And I think, unfortunately, there are some very hard lessons that we need to learn from the conflicts and the wars in places like Ethiopia and Ukraine, and understand that this is hybrid warfare that is being conducted against our societies. And for us to respond to that, we need to have a hybrid response. Increasingly, the platforms are having an impact. And so you're seeing on almost every single open social media platform, a massive campaign by disinformation operators to convert or transfer people from open social onto dark social. There are links in every single one of these campaigns saying, join our WhatsApp group, join our Telegram group. And that's deliberately because they're invisible and we cannot track them, and not even the platforms can algorithmically combat them on those platforms. If we don't move quickly and we don't move at scale, we will never be able to stop the spreading wildfire. And so we need a whole of society ecosystem kind of strategy that goes beyond the traditional kind of human rights defenders that are on this call. We need to start pulling in people with the hard technical skills for us to have a real impact. Sorry, that was a lot of things I tried to squeeze in. But
Right. Thank you, Justin. Let me finally bring in Morgan. Maybe you can tell us, instead of, because we're seeing a trend here where governments seem to be more reluctant about internet penetration or social media platforms, they see it more of a threat instead of something that could actually help their democracies and make lives better for the people and even have the people get the people heard. How can we address this and how can we change this kind of attitude from a government's perspective? I know you're not in government, but then it could be just part of your suggestion would highly appreciate it here.
Yeah, I'll take that. I think everything that's been said here has been very important. I would echo Dr. Wakabi's reference that this is just the tip of the iceberg. These are an opening to a number of future research projects that can dig into the specifics using some of these forensic techniques or using more advanced technologies to try to track a lot of these things. So what I want to say here at the end is to remember that while the end goal of a lot of these disinformation campaigns maybe whether it's economics or political or just social strife in general, depending on the outcome, a lot of the root causes I think can oftentimes be a source of more inspiration. And so I'll just focus here on digital literacy and literacy more generally, which we've talked a bit about. I know a lot of the organizations here are heavily invested in. I think that is somewhere where you can find common ground with governments. I think it's easier for governments to say, disinformation, social media, it's so associated with one another. Why not get rid of these things altogether? Why not stall internet penetration rates? It's much more difficult for governments to argue against the idea that citizens should not be, better educated, better able to discern between true and truths and fictions. And so I think focusing on a lot of these kind of foundational issues, investing in education, investing in issues that allow citizens to be able to use the tools presented by the organizations here today is so fundamental to the next 10, 20, 30 years and how we fight back against disinformation actors. It's just something I wanted to echo here. And I'll leave my contact information below, but I think it's wonderful that we're bringing everyone together to talk about these things. The last thing I wanted to say is that I think the point that Justin made that a lot of this is not occurring in the spaces that we are most able to see them is a very important and troubling one. I think a lot of the reason why we look particularly at social media in most instances is because of the data availability. My previous work was on rumors in societies that are offline, and you see the same patterns of disinformation traveling through these communities. It's just much, much more difficult to track, and it makes its way through radio, it makes its way through mainstream television. And so I think that if we can figure out a way of coming together and investing in these research issues, we'll hopefully be able to make a difference.
All right, thank you, Morgan, for that. Jenny, you have a final word for this panel discussion. And we had a question from Raymond Mujuni, who was asking what is the success of weeding disinformation off the platform using blocking accounts as a strategy?
Sure, thank you, Ian. I'll just echo what others have said, that the research is really compelling and so needed, but that it also points to how much more we need to learn about this phenomenon to be able to tackle it effectively. To the question that was raised, the scale of the problem is so wide that there is no way to estimate what amount of misinformation or disinformation is circulating on any social media platform. We can only take guesses. And as one of the previous speakers said, there's recognition that we can only address a fraction of it. I think that my final word is just thank you. Thank you for the time and the opportunity to learn from all of you. I look forward to following up with different folks in this meeting to see what I can do in my own capacity at Meta. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jean, Morgan, Simone, and Justin. We're giving you virtual claps for such lovely insights. Very briefly, I'd like to invite Ashna Calamero to just give us her final words and so that we can close this discussion up. She is a program manager with CPESA. Ashna.
Thank you, Ian. All I have to say in closing is a very big thank you. Thank you so much for the experiences, the learning, the opportunities and the challenges that have emerged in the discussions here. We truly appreciate the recognition of multi-stakeholder efforts to reduce the harms of disinformation. Collaboration is in our words, so This is something that we live and breathe here at CIPESA, and we are truly honored to be seeing it happening here virtually. We're grateful to the participants for honoring our invitation. At peak, we were at 50. Our target was 25. So thank you so much for honoring our invitations. We appreciate NetGain and the Sigrid Rossing Trust for making this research possible, as well as the Roundtable. We appreciate the various partners that supported the in-country efforts, the experts that supported the workshops, and everything else that made this Roundtable as well as the publication possible. Thank you so much to the speakers, Jean, Morgan, and Justin. We truly, truly appreciate the time and to the time taken out to participate and share your experiences. Of course, thank you, Simone and Dr. Wakabi, even though you're part of the CIPESA team, but yeah, we also appreciate your time and presentations that you've shared. Last and not least, thank you, Ian, for the very, very great moderation. We appreciate that very much. To everybody, the participants will definitely be in touch after this, to each of you for the time and connectivity compensation. And of course, we'll be in touch as part of our wider stakeholder engagement efforts, collaboration and deliberation on the role of technology in governance, the role of technology for human rights, the role of technology for livelihoods. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And last but not least, thank you for the extra 12 minutes. Take care, everyone. Bye.
All right, thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.